Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining me today. I wonder what the weather is like where, as you tune in into episode 3 of Ubuntu Courtyard. Our title today is Sometimes Hard Work Ain't Enough. But before I dive into this new episode, which is episode 3, I just want to thank you for joining us today. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to Ubuntu Courtyard. If you're joining us since last week when we launched our podcasting journey, thank you. You mean the world to me. So thank you for your support and encouragement. I did receive a lot of encouraging feedback from people, and some people had also noted that, I have my own fears and I've struggled with self-confidence. So they were basically encouraging me to keep going. And they also did share their own, understanding of the message as people who have also faced issues concerning self-confidence. So I'm really grateful that a few people did find the talk relatable, encouraging, and they did find inspiration here and there. And so this is a comment that I received, one of the comments as well that was left on YouTube. And this is what the listener said. The ability to take criticism, to have our worldview challenged, to be made to question what we perceive as our reality and who we are. In other words, the fear of uncertainty is what saps confidence, maybe. As I see it, as humans are creatures of habit and familiarity, we rarely actively seek to listen to opinions we disagree with or that challenge our beliefs. Due to this fear is the risk of loss, a fear of ultimately ending up with less than what we originally started with. That's what holds us from taking action. I think it's true. So to willingly expose oneself to that uncomfortable uncertainty takes greater inner strength. And as you say, sometimes unlocking that is as simple as an encouraging word or two. That is so very true. And I also had fears as I launched this podcasting journey, thinking, what will people say? What will they think? How will I be judged? How will I come across? Will anybody listen to me? There's so many amazing people out there who've been doing this for the longest time. Will I have anything new to say? So thank you so much for your encouraging words, and keep on encouraging others. And I'd love to see your comments as we go into episode 3 and beyond. Thank you. So, sorry, I'm just turning over my notebook right now. So our podcast for today is actually inspired by a true story. So last year, in June, July, I traveled to Zimbabwe. I'd lost my brother, and I was traveling to Zimbabwe, and I did spend almost a month in Zimbabwe, and I'm so grateful that I did get to spend time with my family, brothers, sisters, my parents, my mom and dad, and meet other new people that I hadn't seen in a while. And I also had the opportunity to meet other people that I'd been communicating with via WhatsApp. So at some point, I had the opportunity to visit this person. And I was hoping that we'd probably touch on a few things that I touched on in our previous communications. Nothing bad, but I was, probably, we just went because we'd communicated a lot, because we were introduced to each other by my parent, and this person, when we went there with my sister, he was expecting us, of course, and he leapt into storytelling mode just like that. When we got to where he was waiting for us, I was amazed. I think we ended up talking for 3-4 hours. it was quite an amazing and enlightening conversation. And when I came back to the UK, having had these conversations, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. And 2 months ago or so, I did get back to him and ask if I could use his story, to encourage others, because I'd found the story really, really helpful, and it helped me pause and reflect and think about my journey as well. And he said it was okay as long as I kept his name and other details confidential. And I really understand why. So I will not be mentioning his name or what he does for a living. I'll just mention the story that, the bits and pieces from the story that are really meaningful to us and helpful as well. And then we'll go into 4 major life lessons that I learned as a result of talking to him or him sharing his story. So I hope I'll do justice to the story. So he started his story. He talked about, like many people who live in Zimbabwe or who used to live in Zimbabwe, things have been difficult for quite a number of years. And a lot of people have had to leave the country, seek, greener pastures, go to other countries looking for work, employment opportunities, career opportunities, educational opportunities. So that's what he did at some point after realizing that he was going nowhere really, and he'd just been married, and he knew that in order to go back to where he needed to be, he had to get out of Zimbabwe, out of the comfort zone, and seek new opportunities. But the opportunities were sort of limited. But the only place he could go to was South Africa. So he left for South Africa with so much hope, because a lot of people, when they go out of the country, they send money back home to help those who are at home, family members usually, and other people, children even. So he thought, if I leave, everything will be okay for my family as well. I can support my family, and then, things can improve. So he went to South Africa, and it was difficult to find meaningful employment. But eventually he found something to do at a farming community, something like that. And his job, amongst many other migrants working there, it involved harvesting onions. It was a long stretch of land, of fields upon fields of onions. And we're talking miles and miles and miles. Because I remember him saying the field, he was describing how long it was from where we were on that day up to where my parents' house is. So that's a good 30-minute walk, 40-minute walk, depending on who you are and or how fast you are. But that's just one row of onions going in one direction if somebody's walking fast and comfortably. So imagine where you can walk for 30 minutes or 40 minutes comfortably. That was just one row of onions, and then there'll be another row after row after row after row. So the accommodation, he described the accommodation. It wasn't glamorous in any way, shape or form. But the most important thing, or the one thing that was really touching, was how they had to wake up early in the morning, maybe around 4 a.m. in the morning. They'd be up, already going to the fields. They'd be carried there or ferried to the farm in big trucks, and they were the sort of trucks where if you get inside, no one could see you basically from outside, because I'm sure by the time they went back later on, they'd be, full of onions, full of harvest. So they'd get in there. Not just him, many others with their jackets and hats. People just, covering themselves up, just getting ready for the day. And then they'd start work quite early in the morning. And that was that, really. Day in, day out. Barely any breaks. And to top it all, he wasn't getting paid that much. In fact, it was even difficult for him to send anything back home. He also touched on how difficult it was for him and other people to get firewood and things like that to cook meals for themselves. The conditions weren't as good. But he did try. He did, push and push just like everybody else. Everybody thought that things would get better. But they didn't. It was the same story day in, day out. A story of struggle, a story of hard work, and potentially people just sitting there working, hoping that somehow things would improve. And I'm sure they'd still manage to save a little bit of money, but it wasn't enough. So he sat down one day and then he said to himself, and he said these words in Shona because we were communicating in Shona. And tomorrow is Thursday and I will share this story in Shona as episode 4, but I just thought I'd kickstart with the English version of the story. So he sat down and had a moment of reflection, maybe a eureka moment, and he thought to himself, I work so hard, but I'm lacking in wisdom somewhere because things were not making sense. If anything, he worked, whilst in South Africa, he worked so hard, much like, not even close to what he'd ever done in his life back in Zimbabwe. But the outcome wasn't as great as he thought it would be in terms of money and obviously lifestyle. The conditions were hard. So in Shona, he said, kushanda ndinoshanda, asinjere handina. So if you speak Shona, you will know that this is probably Samanyika version, njere, not njere, but yeah, it's still njere, wisdom. So he realized that, he had to think, he had to come up with a plan. He realized that he was capable of hard work. What he did in South Africa made him realize that he could work. So he decided to go back to Zimbabwe. Unlike many others, who still choose to stay. I can't remember after how long of working in the fields, he decided to go back home. He called his wife and he said he was coming back home without much to show for it, for his work in South Africa. And so he went back to Zimbabwe. And when he got back to Zimbabwe, one of the first things he did was to speak to someone who was known in the land or in the area where he came from as a very good farmer. He always had a good harvest. So he went to see him and he asked him, he asked for any secrets that he had, or, I don't know how he asked this man, but he wanted to know how best he could improve, his harvest, because he realized that, okay, I've got land back home. I could turn that piece of land into something productive, because he'd seen the kind of work that he was doing in South Africa. And he thought, okay, if I work, this hard, I'm sure I'll produce something from my own land. And this man told him one thing. He said, the secret was in preparing long before the rains came. So in other words, he didn't have to wait for the rainy season to start plowing his land. And so that means this man usually started preparing for the next season, probably during the winter season, when there wasn't much sign of rains. So he held on to that piece of information, and then he started preparing his land. So rainy season in Zimbabwe, I know because of, climate changes and everything, it's been sort of changing over the years. But a lot of people start planting. Majority of land, they now start planting even before Christmas or even after Christmas, depending on when the rains come. Well, some people with irrigation schemes, they do start earlier, but I think rainy season is December, January, February, thereabout. October, I know, is one of the hottest months. October and November, usually it's really hot. So you can imagine this man was probably working July, August, September, October. July, August, September, usually the winter months. And then September, October, hottest months of the season. But it already started preparing for the rains. And nobody knows. He didn't know, and nobody to this day, they don't know whether it's going to be a drought sometimes or whether there's going to be abundant rainfall. But nevertheless, he still prepared his land. And the rains came one day in the middle of the night. He was sleeping, and the rain, he could, hear outside that it was raining. And first thing in the morning, he leapt out of his bed, went straight to the fields and started planting his seeds. He was so fast, so much that even the person who told him what to do was actually surprised. By the time everybody else was waking up, he'd already planted his crops. His maize. And and he waited. And that year, for the first time in his life, he had such an abundant harvest. He had so much, that he produced. He could even afford to give others for free. And I think that helped him with, maintaining theft, probably, because if people knew that they were allowed to get, a few maize cobs from his fields, then they'd take without destroying his harvest, basically. So he allowed a few other people to take what they needed to take from the fields, and then harvested. I don't know how many bags of harvest he had afterwards, but it was so plentiful, and that alone was enough to spur him on, to start thinking about what other things that he could do. And he started, seeing that there were needs in the community. For example, things needed this and that. So instead of being choosy about what to sell, he started buying stuff that the community really needed. And he started talking to people face to face, taking long journeys, talking to people, building strong relationships with the community. And he wasn't choosy about what he was selling. He was just focusing on what was needed in the community. So that's something else that he did. And that helped him. He started making a lot of money, became comfortable enough to buy his first car, second car, third car over time. But he wasn't, he knew and he still appreciated that it was hard work that took him there. It could have been a different story had he stayed in South Africa. And to this day, he's doing well. He's doing other things as well. And is comfortable by Zimbabwean standards at the moment, where life is pretty hard for so many people. And I believe he's one of the very few people who wouldn't even want to leave the country right now as we speak. So he also touched on someone else's story, because our conversation was quite, long and varied. We touched on different topics. And he also touched on how some people believe that in order to be successful, they have to practice all sorts of practices like black. I don't know how to put it across, but it involves using certain beliefs and doing certain things in order to be successful. So some people call it kuromba, some people call it witchcraft, and it's like when people perform all sorts of black magic because they believe that these are the sort of things that bring money or success. I don't know what you think. If you live in Zimbabwe, if you know a few stories, please let us know. I would hear of a few stories from a few other people, one or two other people who went into detail about what they'd learned and what people were resorting to in order to get some money. But he said one thing that he noticed is that people would be so faithful to these practices. Instead of working hard, they would rather do these shortcuts, but they come with so many consequences, for example, and usually when the person dies, whoever was responsible for doing these things, there isn't much generational wealth being passed on because of the way he acquired his wealth. And he said he believed that this is the reason why so many people, why even Africa has plenty of wealth, but people aren't passing on that wealth from generation to generation because of certain practices. Not all of them, but some practices. So we're not touching on that at the moment, but I think you can see a picture that sometimes beliefs they are different, and the more people think that instead of working hard or working smart, which is something that we're going to look into as well, if people think that they can become successful by doing this and that, then they're less likely to even try, aren't they? But that's not the hope. That's not the point of the story. So I did find much inspiration from that story, especially about how he managed to get a bumper harvest. And from that story, I managed to come up with 4 key takeaways. And I'm just going to share them. Number 1, what I learned is the importance of preparing or planning before launching anything. You talked about how he started preparing for the rains before they even appeared in the horizon. And most people will wait for the rains to come first and then they'll start. Or they'll wait for a sign that it's okay, to go ahead before they even start, working on it, on something. So preparing and planning before launching is very important, and it actually streamlines your efforts. Let's say if you're starting a new business, or the more prepared you are, the better you will be when you start, let's say, a new business. And he was working in silence. I'm sure whilst everybody else was going about their business, he worked in silence. It was lonely. There weren't many people doing the same thing, but nevertheless, he kept pushing. And this is one of the things that guaranteed him a good harvest, just like the person who advised him to do so. So you don't have to wait for things to be perfect before you start acting as well. And there is a saying that fortune favors the brave. And I believe it's not just about luck. It's when you've done the work, there will come a time when things just start happening. It might not look like there is anything happening. Whatever it is that you decide to do, whatever it is that you want to achieve, whether you want to achieve a better body for yourself, having put on weight, whether you're studying for something, whether you starting a new business or even a new podcast like me. It's not going to happen overnight, the success that everybody seeks. You have to put in the work and do it over and over again before you start seeing positive results from your efforts. And this is where some people get discouraged, because most people think that, success is an overnight thing. It's not. There's a lot of preparation, there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of research that goes into it. So don't be discouraged just because things aren't as fast as you want them to be, or it's a lonely journey whilst you do what you need to do. Success is incremental. It's those small activities that you do. For him, he was preparing land, he was plowing the land and probably leveling it up, making sure the soil was loose, and when the rains came, he woke up early in the morning, planted, and that gave him an advantage over everybody else. And point number two, seek knowledge or acquire skills. And that alone, that also will separate you from many other people. For Christians, there's a Bible verse which states that many people perish. In fact, it's God saying, my people perish because of lack of knowledge. And over the years, there's so many things that I've learned, things that I think are common knowledge. But when I talk to some people, or when I see other people, how they live their lives, I realize they actually don't know. They don't have the knowledge. So knowledge is power. Without knowledge, you'll be lost, really. So it's very important to do things such as reading books, good books if you can read. He asked someone else what he did. He saw somebody who had a success story and he wanted to emulate that, and he asked this person and he was told what to do. And that changed his journey. He learned to do something that he'd never done before, because he wasn't afraid to seek knowledge, and he wasn't afraid to try new things. For example, when he started selling new things, acquiring those selling skills, things that he'd never done before. That takes courage, to put yourself in that position where you go against the grain, really, what everybody else is doing in your community. So sometimes you just have to have that confidence. But in order to gain that confidence to do the right thing, that becomes evidence that you were actually not lost over time, is to go against the grain sometimes. So seek knowledge. I'm always thinking about how, the emergency of AI, artificial intelligence, and how so many people are afraid of artificial intelligence. They say, it's going to take, people, it's going to lead to all sorts of things. But one thing that I've learned about AI is that it's learning. For the past few years, AI has been learning from people. We, the people, are teaching artificial intelligence what to do, how to think, how to put information together, how to analyze, and things like that. And the more artificial intelligence learns, for example, the faster it becomes and the more accurate it becomes. But it's being fed by the efforts of human beings, be it from books, be it from the creative industry, from people asking questions and things like that. We've been training artificial intelligence. And one day, artificial intelligence is going to be so much smart. In fact, it already is, than so many people. But then even as human beings, if we are willing to learn as well, we won't be caught out, and thinking, oh my gosh, my life is going to be replaced by a machine. As Christians, this is my belief that we've been given power and authority and dominion over everything on earth, including animals, including everything that God created, including machines as well, technology. But if we lack knowledge, we will be controlled by them. You being a human being doesn't necessarily mean knowing everything. No, you just have to know enough in order to save others. That's the way I see it. And I think most people are really afraid about the concept of learning because depending on where you grew up, learning wasn't a pleasurable experience for many. So many people were scolded for failing. So many people were, used to cram, just to pass exams. That's how they remember learning. Or many people didn't even have the resources. And I remember even in high school, we didn't always have the right textbooks. I remember when I was studying African history, for example, I had textbooks for European history, but nothing for African history. And I had to rely on someone else's notes. I didn't know if those notes were actually accurate. I was happy that someone else had given me these notes. And I was focusing my attention on what somebody once wrote many years ago. I don't think I focused much on what the teacher was trying to tell us. But because there was something written, I trusted it so much. And my African history exams were horrible, to say the least. And I remember coming across the teacher. He told me that pretty much I'd failed African history. And I passed European history with flying colors. But I had textbooks for European history. There's so many things about African history that aren't documented and things that we're losing because knowledge was passed on from generation to generation through oral tradition. And once somebody died, they usually died with their knowledge. So knowledge has power to, to help us even build, learn about the past, build a better future, leave a legacy, for our children, or a framework or a blueprint for people who will come before us. And other cultures, they're very good at doing this, preserving knowledge. If you go to the British Library, for example, you will be amazed by the number of books and writings that they have. People who publish books, they do send their copies to the British Library. I remember once searching for a book on African traditions and cultures. I couldn't find it anywhere else. In fact, I found that book. I came across that book in the library, and it was probably one of the. I don't think there aren't many copies, and I ended up placing an order from America, and they did send me a copy. And I was actually surprised by the history, of Africa, or, how it affected, the formation of Zimbabwe, from the Bantu migration and, Swahili influences and all sorts of things. And this history was actually put together by somebody who, a white person basically. But a lot of us Africans, we normally don't preserve our knowledge in black and white. So some people, they don't realize how important it is to gain that knowledge so that they can turn around their lives for the better. So that's point number 2. That's the key lesson that I learned. Seek knowledge and acquire skills. This person, that's exactly what he did. And he had the opportunity to rewrite his story. He got a bumper harvest and he managed to do other things. And to this day, he's pretty much comfortable, and I'm sure he's going places. And one other thing that I wrote somewhere is that, be willing to learn, including difficult concepts. It's not always easy. Sometimes you'll come across things that challenge you, but keep trying and do one small thing at a time. It's not about knowing everything in one go. Let's say if you're somebody who's studying something at university or even at school and you're struggling with a concept, just do one thing at a time. You practice, revise over and over again. I always encourage my children, especially my son, who's still at school. My daughter is now at university. But I'm always telling my son that the teachers want the best for him. They want him to do well. So if he's ever stuck, he shouldn't be afraid to go back and ask the teacher. And the teacher will be more than happy. In most cases, they will be more than happy to help the students if they're stuck. So don't be afraid. I think the education system that a lot of our children are now exposed to is so much different to what we grew up, being exposed to. So always encourage your children as well to ask, for help. You don't have to know everything. No, even the most knowledgeable people, they do get, stuck sometimes. And I did touch on this topic of doing things, in small steps. If you're learning something in Hilltop, that was my first book that I've written so far. I published in 2021. But it does touch on the concept of doing things small, bit by bit, because I once worked with young children, and I'd noticed how they'd really struggle and sometimes just they'd want to give up because they found something very difficult. But if they started reasoning and taking, smaller steps at a time, before they knew it, they'd be so much confident to tackle even complicated calculations. So keep on learning, and when you get stuck, ask usually the teacher. Or now we have so much information online. Even if you're going to university, there will be sources. They will tell you where you can get this or that from, the right places where you can get information. So utilize it to your advantage, and you'll notice that everything will become easier with time. And point number 3, be willing to put in the work, but work smart. So we're going to touch on SMART goals. For example, smart working smart. It's not always about the hard work. Like this man was working long hours, waking up early in the morning, going back home, wherever they used to live at night time. No lifestyle, no rest, so much pain and suffering, not even that much money. But he was working hard, and so many people that think that working hard is the answer to everything. But unfortunately, it's not always the case. So yes, put in the work, but work smart. So you must have, smart goals. For example, have a goal. Ask yourself why you're doing what you're doing. For example, if you're studying, for example, you might end up working, doing menial jobs and things, even though you're studying for a law degree, for example, and you're working in a bar. That's okay. You know that this is just a temporary thing, so that you can get money to buy food and, be able to focus on your studies. So know the reason, the why you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. If you have young children, for example, you might be forced to work part-time, not because you don't have any goals or you don't know who you are, but this is the situation that you have. So maybe a couple, someone's working part-time hours because you need to look after the children. So always have a reason, and utilize your strengths to your advantage. And this person knew that he was capable, eventually came to the realization that he was capable of working hard. He had the strength, and he had the piece of land back home. So he went back to that and he utilized his strengths. Every person has strengths. We are different, but those differences, we have them so that we can serve each other. We were created as one body. And if you look at your body, there are arms, hands, you have legs, you have a heart, you have a brain, eyes, ears, tongue, all those things that you can see or cannot even see, that in, all sorts of systems, reproductive system, digestive system, all sorts of systems in our bodies to sustain each other. And that's how we were created as people, really. This is why some people are very good at, for example, looking after others when they're, treating, let's say, doctors and nurses. That's what they were created to do for the majority, I have friends who, when I'm talking to them and I'm listening to their stories, what it is that they do and everything, they don't share confidential information. But the way they talk about what they do with passion, it makes me realize that, wow, these people are actually amazing at work. They love it. They absolutely love it. And they're capable of doing certain things that I will never be able to do. But that's who they are. They are living and working according to their strengths. We all have weaknesses, but sometimes it helps if you utilizing your strengths and using them, to your advantage to save other people. Because many people, they spend their lives following what others are doing. I wanted to touch on the diaspora community before I started this talk, but I've realized that perhaps no, it's a topic for another day. But I've noticed that there are so many people who do things simply because somebody else has done it. For example, if one person starts buying trucks and sending them back to their home country, everybody else is doing the same. If one person starts farming, everybody else goes into farming. But we as people, we are created with so many things, with so many different ideas, different talents, different skills. This is why some people can cook, they can bake. Some people they have so much good at doing, like hairdressing. Some people are amazing at fixing things, for example, cars or plumbers or building. They're amazing. Some people build cars or construct cars. Some people are very good when it comes to technology. You don't have to be a jack of all trades. All you have to do is find what you're good at. Usually the things that you're most passionate about, that's where your purpose is. I believe those two go hand in hand. I love writing, for example. I've always loved writing from when I was a baby. Not a baby, maybe when I started, being able to write. I've always loved writing. To this day, I can write forever. I love writing. And here I am turning up, showing up with my, that knowledge, the skills, the talents. I can utilize them in business settings. I can write, company documents and that kind of thing. I can write books. I can write all sorts of articles. That's my strength. And I'm so grateful that over the years, I've been able to pursue my passion. Because that's where my purpose is. It's not always easy to follow your passion. I have to tell you that. And if I didn't have the support of some people, I don't think I'd be able to do this. Following your passion is one of the most difficult things to do. And I have come across a lot of comments or even criticism to just do what everybody else is doing. But in so doing, that's how we just destroy ourselves. We live our lives without passion. We go to work, but we really don't want to go. We really don't want to be there. And it shows. It shows in how we feel at the end of the day. It shows in how we feel on a day-to-day basis. We dread going to work. Sunday comes, and if you're working Monday to Friday, you rest, over the weekend. And then when Sunday comes, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going back to that job. You have stress, high cortisol levels. That leads to all sorts of health issues because you're not living according to who you truly are. So, for example, if you know that you're stuck, you've been doing this thing for the longest time, and you can't just quit in most cases. If you come up with a plan, start doing what you really want to do, bit by bit. I'm sure one day you'll get there. You might have to work elsewhere, if you know that you're working towards another dream, doing things that you're truly passionate about, even if you don't want to make money, that will make a difference. So yes, hard work pays, but work smart. And usually if you're working without that passion, without a purpose, you're most likely to burn out. And if you're driven by money alone, you're also much likely to burn out. Passion keeps you and I going when the going gets tough. And working smart also means knowing when to call it quits. When this man traveled all the way to South Africa, doing everything that he had to do, he wasn't afraid to say, this is not working for me. I'm going back to Zimbabwe. He went back. And he started doing things that were meaningful to him, that had value. Instead of just working for somebody, getting nothing, peanuts in return, he went back, utilized his land, went through the motions, gained knowledge, did the hard work, prepared. So he only managed to do this because he knew when to call it quits. Even in business, sometimes you start a business. I remember I was part of a group of people. When it's 3 people, it's now a group, isn't it? So there were 3 of us. We started a business, and we realized that it wasn't working. No matter how passionate we are, and passionate we really are, we really wanted this thing to work. But after working on it for 1.5 years, we realized that it wasn't going anywhere. So we decided to dissolve the company, and that's okay. In business, even in business, there is a principle or a law of diminishing returns, that sometimes you can put in so much effort, but if you're not getting, you put more effort than you're getting results. If you get to that point where you always exerting yourself, putting in more money, doing everything, going above and beyond, and you're not getting any rewards in reward in return, then you might have to call it quits. You might have to reconsider. You might have to come up with a new plan. And that's not failure. It's just part of the learning process. And usually what you would have learned as a result of failure will also kickstart your journey as well into a new project. That knowledge doesn't go to waste. This I tell you from experience. And working smart also means just being hopeful. Nobody knows what the future brings. Nobody knows. There are a few people, or some people, who do certain things when they know that there are guarantees. But unfortunately, life doesn't work like that. Sometimes we have to take risks in order to achieve anything meaningful in life. Do things that benefit other people, or provide things that are of value to others. For example, this man, obviously, he did plant his maize. Maize is a staple food in Zimbabwe. And during the rainy season, you can eat it boiled, you can roast it, and then when it's dry, it's turned into mealie meal. So there's always a need for maize, and that's what he did. And I'm sure he could sell something and keep some for himself. And when he started selling other things as well, he wasn't focusing on what he felt like selling. He was selling on what people really wanted. So he did his research. So wherever you live right now, there's usually a gap. So if you can fill a gap, the better. You're most likely going to be successful, and that's smart working. And one other lesson under smart working is how this person developed his time management skills. He knew exactly, that he had to get up early in the morning, probably before the sun started, scorching the earth. He would have, risen early in the morning to do his plowing, And it's all about time management. So it depends on the environment, the type of work you do, what you do, but time management is essential. For some people, it means burning the midnight the midnight oil. When everybody's asleep, that's when they, they become alive and put in the work. That's okay. You don't have to do what everybody else is doing. We all have different ways of doing things. If your job allows you to be flexible, utilize that. If you have to work shifts, then you work shifts, but make sure you also rest and things like that. And the final lesson that I did learn from this story is that determination moves mountains. So don't be lazy. Remember what I said about being driven by passion and purpose? This man also shared another story of someone he knew who came from a very poor background. And this person used to deliver things from one place, point A to point B. And I think he'd get paid for his services. But his car wasn't roadworthy. And he'd get arrested. Not once, not twice. And I think I have to put a disclaimer here. I'm not saying go out there, break rules, laws, regulations. They are there, for a purpose. But this person was determined, and he would pass through the same roadblock. Well, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it'd still get fined, or sometimes he'd have to go to the police station and do all sorts of things, paperwork and that kind of thing. A few days later, he'd be back. And it'd go through the same process over and over again. But he was delivering stuff. And over time, he became successful enough to buy himself a new car. And now he's pretty much comfortable. He's very successful. I think this story was shared because we're talking about the number of people who are building new homes, new houses at the moment. Amazing buildings springing up in Zimbabwe. People in the diaspora community, they're building, but locals are also building amazing houses. And he was saying this guy now owns, I don't know how many properties he has, but whatever he has is beautiful, and he has a success story to share, or even to show others that he was determined. So determination definitely moves mountains. So we've come to the end of our podcast number 3. I hope you did find it useful. If you've got anything to share with others regarding what we talked about today, or even add to this story, please leave a comment wherever you are. If you're on Spotify, there's now a comment section. If you're on YouTube, please feel free to leave comments so that others can also find encouraging and inspirational information from all of us, really, because that's why we're here. We're here to help each other thrive. That's the essence of Ubuntu Courtyard, really. So have a lovely day, a lovely evening, wherever you are, whatever it is you're doing, and take care. Until the next episode, goodbye.